Alright, hello and welcome everybody. I have something for you today that it's the same old nonsense over and over again, and it really irritates me sometimes. I saw this video about aluminum cans, if you believe it, and what this video is, I'll put a link in the description, but what the video is it's like a poster child for the Nirvana Fallacy, right? It's this guy who, in the midst of making a bunch of goofy noises and mugging for the camera, like talks about how aluminum cans aren't going to solve the problem of plastic bottles, and like there are so many pieces of bad economics in this video that I just wanted to kind of highlight several of them. And if you go and you watch the video, you'll be able to see how absolutely ingrained the anti-market, anti-private property mindset is these days, which is kind of scary. So, what is the Nirvana Fallacy? The Nirvana Fallacy is where you basically have a situation, and you say that because action X doesn't completely solve all problems, we shouldn't bother with action X. Which ignores the possibility, for instance, that action X fixes a large number of problems or something like that. The idea that this doesn't fix all the problems, therefore we must abandon it and look for something that fixes all the problems. That's the Nirvana Fallacy in a nutshell. And so this guy spends a bunch of time talking about aluminum cans and how there's a lot of propaganda out saying that aluminum is very recyclable, and yeah, that's true. But then he goes into the caveats of that I think most people are aware of, but at the same time, he's saying them as if they're like some kind of amazing revelation. Aluminum is very recyclable, but it takes energy to recycle it. Aluminum is very recyclable, but some people throw away aluminum cans in the garbage and they end up in landfills. Points like this are generally made as kind of like a Gish Gallop situation, where he makes a bunch of really stupid points and a couple of relatively obscure points in an attempt to basically make it difficult to dismantle the video's arguments by just making it so that any counter arguments have to be extremely long and go after all these easily debunkable points. Okay, it is true that it does take energy to recycle aluminum cans. It takes energy to recycle anything, right? There's a problem here because it's not just that people are using more aluminum cans, they're also using aluminum bottles. And aluminum bottles with screw-on caps are actually reusable. And so reuse reduces the amount of recycling that must be done for a given object, for a given amount of material. He misses that. Now, he does mention that there are these bottles, but he doesn't note that making bottles instead of cans greatly further reduces the costs of recycling because people will reuse them. There's also the fact that if environmental activists weren't working on making nuclear power impossible, then the energy requirements of aluminum recycling would be much less because energy costs would be much lower because there'd be a much larger supply of energy. That's another problem with these arguments is that they'll make one point and then make another point as if it's unrelated, when in fact point number two, if point number two were properly countered, then the result would result in the fixing of problem one as well. It's a way to compound problems to make things look worse than they actually are. You suggest multiple solutions that don't actually solve the problem in a useful way. That is, they solve a problem in a costly way that people don't like, and then it also has negative roll-on effects to other possible solutions to other problems. This is what the it costs energy to recycle aluminum argument is. It's we'd have a lot more energy if environmental people weren't, working against, say, nuclear power. There's there's also the fact that there's actually usually a plastic or epoxy liner on the inside of aluminum cans, so that whatever's in them doesn't taste like aluminum, which is kind of a big deal. Like Coca-Cola doesn't want their Coca-Cola to taste like aluminum when you drink it. They want it to taste like it was when they bottled it, right? And so in order to do that, they have to use a minuscule amount of plastic in order to protect it from the aluminum metal itself. Of course, this is super important for something like Coca-Cola, which is highly acidic, right? And therefore, it would probably eat away at the aluminum given time. There needs to be a coating there, or else there's going to be chemical interactions, which might actually be dangerous for the consumer. There's ignoring the fact that there's another tactic here that I love to hear. It's that companies don't care about the planet and they don't care about your well-being. This ignores the fact that their products actually produce well-being in the Austrian praxeological sense. You drink Coca-Cola because it's pleasurable, right? It quenches your thirst, it's refreshing, it's fizzy, it tastes good, yada, yada, yada. It might not be the best thing for your health, but, it's up to you to make the judgment as to how much Coca-Cola you're going to drink and how you're going to, deal with the potential negative health effects of drinking sugary sodas. This is not something that the government needs to deal with, and this is not something that the company really ought to bother with either. They already have the ingredients listed on the freaking can. What else do you want? For them to fund, propaganda campaigns against their own products? Why would they do that? Well, they would only do that if someone pointed a gun at their head, which, all right-thinking people oppose. And of course, this is kind of like Adam Smith's invisible hand turned on its head. Yeah, I don't care about the well-being of the guy that works at the grocery store directly, but I do buy groceries from him, and that gives him money with which he can do things to make his own life better. That's the whole point of private property and voluntary exchange, is that when people voluntarily exchange things, they both gain value, right? That's the whole point. And so you don't have to care about the well-being of, some other person or the nebulous thing. Nothing would get done if everybody only was able to do things that they really cared about the long-term like add-on effects of. Like, when I write a book because I want, to entertain you. But if you decide to use that book as a doorstop, that's still using the book, right? It's not the use of the book that I want, but, heck, you bought a copy, do with it what you want. It's your property. You thought that using it as a doorstop was a better use of the, $3 that you spent on my book than going out and buying a pack of 10 regular doorstops for $3. I don't know. Something like that. Turning Adam Smith's, or at least ignoring the implications of Adam Smith's invisible hand, is a mistake that a lot of people make when they're making these anti-market arguments. Like, oh, but you don't care. And they make this weird alienation argument. It's like, man, the guy who is cutting down a tree that later gets manufactured into a pencil that someone uses to write, their golf score on, it's not. The whole point is that they don't have to care. The point is that the fact that they have the institution of private property and the fact that they can exchange voluntarily with others allows them to create value for people they don't even know exist. That's the whole point of free market economics, is that you have this Pareto positive, Pareto superior situation where in a voluntary exchange both sides gain, right? There's also a lot of ocean plastic hysteria described in this video. One of the things that he mentions is that apparently Jaden Smith was surfing. Jaden Smith, the super rich inherited, heir of Will Smith, was surfing, and legend has it that he saw a plastic bottle in the ocean where he was surfing, and he said, "I should make a brand of water that doesn't create plastic bottle waste," which, is not a completely, that's not an evil thing, but it does show that that these people are really, really easy to kind of co-opt into particular methods of thought. Like, it could have just been that some guy accidentally dropped the bottle into the surf when he was, sitting on the beach earlier that day. It doesn't imply that there's some kind of massive systemic problem. And yet, people do talk about, these so-called plastic iceberg type things or whatever they call them that are floating around in the ocean apparently. Let's see, other things to mention about this video. Yeah, so the Nirvana fallacy here is that no, aluminum cans, switching from plastic bottles to aluminum cans doesn't completely fix the problem, but it serves the market better, it's cheaper, it's more recyclable, and people who want to produce less plastic waste, it's a more renewable, it's a more recyclable system, right? If by market standards it's an improvement, then it's an improvement, and bad mouthing it because it doesn't completely 100% eliminate all plastic use is naive at best and stupid and misguided at worst, or at medium, and like actively working towards doing something horrible to people at worst, but probably it's not that. There's kind of this like weird disdain of profit throughout the whole video when which belies kind of this top-down view of how markets ought to work, right? Like, he talks about this like new can type that was 90% recyclable, but it got, patented or whatever, and so only one company could produce them. And lo and behold, companies that don't want to have, fragile supply chains said, no, we're not going to use the 90% recycled can because these other ones work just as well, they're cheaper, and we can get them from multiple different sources. So if one of our sources decided to be a jerk, or just, there's some kind of natural disaster somewhere, we have multiple ways to solve our desire for these cans. That doesn't mean also that the company that created the 90%, recycled aluminum can is a bad thing either. It just means that, like, you can't just, like, force people to use to choose the same arbitrary parameters for what they buy and why they buy it and how they value things as you do. That's another point of private property and voluntary exchange, is that I might really like the color green, but that doesn't give me the right to point a gun at my neighbor and tell him to paint his house green. There's some really like dumb stuff in there where like he's talking with somebody and like she suddenly blurts out like, "Is renting a subscription?" And it's like, it's very mugging for the camera and very like stupid, because like, yeah, obviously renting is a subscription. You have an agreement where you subscribe to purchasing housing from a person for a limited period of time, and you pay over. Yes, of course it's a subscription. Your job is probably a subscription. Your boss subscribes to a certain amount of your labor per week. That's yes, of course it is. It's very dumb. It's very dumb and like just like irritatingly so. There's also this great part where they're like, should we really be applauding these companies for coming up with aluminum bottles and aluminum cans when what they're just doing is bottling our own human right water and selling it back to us? It's like, dude, you have no idea what a human right is, right? There's no clean water has been and still is one of the most historically difficult things to provide for people ever. And water, in like the civilized world, in like first world countries, is relatively cheap because we have these massive systems of infrastructure that are designed to filter out and clean the water. But like, there's plenty of places where they don't have that yet. And, it'd be nice if they had it, but it requires capital investment. And when there's no private property rights and there's no voluntary exchange, then there's no incentive to produce actually useful stuff. And just calling thing a human right doesn't make it so. And that's another one of those things that really angers me all the time when I hear it, because it's just this endless list of like, oh well, I want medical care. Well, okay, cool. I mean, if you want to cut on yourself, you can give yourself as much medical care as you want. If you want to go find what's the tree that they first synthesized aspirin from? If you want to go find some of those trees and make yourself aspirin, go for it. You're free to do that. But like, you don't have the right to demand that somebody administer these things to you. That's called slavery. And using government to do it is just slavery with extra steps. it's an endless list of things that people want that they claim they need, and that line can be a little bit gray sometimes, right? Like certainly I need water, but the question is, how much? People can usually get by with a lot less than they demand of any given need, right? Like I certainly use a lot more water than I drink, right? I mean, I had a shower this morning. Be thankful. but like, uh, yeah. And then this guy goes off on being like, oh, there's just so much nuance that people aren't getting onto. It's like the nuance that you're talking about is just this crazy, statist nonsense where like you don't get exactly what you want, so you have somebody with a gun get it for you. That's not even discussion. That's not even a conversation. That's just robbery. And this is one of those things where people who don't admit that the state is what it is really, tick me off, because they're like, well, it's just the people doing this thing, and we all agreed to the social contract. And it's like, I can hear Lysander Spooner yelling at me in the back of my head. There's other stuff too, like he talks about like the aluminum cans that get thrown away by mistake, right? Or just by laziness. Let's say it's all laziness. Those cans still exist. It's just that mining them is more expensive than they're currently worth, right? Like this is one of those things where the market can totally fix the problem of needing more aluminum for more cans and bottles, recycling more aluminum, and stuff like that. If these companies, because he does a lot of like rending his garments over like, oh, but if they actually do switch over to aluminum, we're going to need so much more aluminum that's just not going to work out. And it's this weird top-down nonsense where it's like, well, no, what's going to happen is that company A is going to buy 5% more aluminum cans this year than they did last year. The company that they buy them from is going to buy a little bit more aluminum from their supplier of raw aluminum. The price of aluminum is going to go up slightly, and people are going to start looking for new, cheaper ways to, make aluminum cans. They're either going to promote more recycling, or they're going to find cheaper ways to do the recycling, or they're going to find new deposits of aluminum to mine. There's a million different ways that the market can handle this problem, and this top-down view of like, well, if government doesn't step in, they're going to take away our human right to have clean water. It's like, bitch, humans didn't have clean water for the last 6,000 years. I don't know. It's a very derpy video, and like I was thinking about doing like a side-by-side run of it, but like the problem with that, number one, is that he makes a bunch of like funny soy jack noises throughout the thing, and there's a lot of really wasted time in the video. You'll see if you go watch it. But these are kind of his main points, and it's just another one of those anti-free market, anti-voluntary videos where the way that the market has solved this problem is not entirely up to my standards, and therefore I will point guns at people. And the Jaden Smith thing is pretty funny, though, I got to admit. There's also there's one more technique that he uses that I think is really worth highlighting for just a minute here, and that is that he talks about the fact that there's these plastic liners inside the aluminum cans, right? And he says that there may be certain tiny, minuscule amounts of like BPAs that get into the drinks because of the use of those plastic liners. Then he's like, oh, but there's a bunch of studies that say that the amount is probably negligible. Okay, this does two things. Number one, it ignores the fact that the alternative is to put those drinks into bottles that are simply made of plastic, which might have similar or greater amounts of BPAs leaching into similar chemicals leaching into the drink itself, right? Plus, it has the eco price that is higher of the plastic. But the other thing that's really happening here, and this is something that I see people doing a lot, is that it kind of leaves this nebulous, like, well, we think it's not going to hurt you, but it might thing going on, and it's a very easy thing to do to claim, well, we're not sure, and so like we're gonna, but what we're trying to do is put the burden of proof on the other side, basically. So yeah, that's another fun one to see. And once you realize that this is a tactic that statists use a lot, you start to see it kind of everywhere. There's this one study that says that the minimum wage didn't do the bad things that you expected to do in this particular situation. It's like, well, that's not a substitute for actual theory. Like, if you can explain how raising the price of something didn't reduce the demand, I'd love to hear it, right? That's why you need theory to interpret data, and you can't just use data, because there's always going to be, because if you only worry about a 5% confidence, a 95% confidence interval, then yeah, you're going to look through a bunch of data, and 5% of the time you're going to find data that seems to statistically significantly pick up the point that you're trying to make. That's why theory is important. I kind of got off on a tangent here. Suffice it to say, this aluminum can video is a poster child for the Nirvana Fallacy. It is a poster child for disingenuous argumentation in favor of more government control over the things that you do every day. And it's put together in a kind of lighthearted, muggy, funny way. Mugging for the camera, I mean, not muggy as in humid, but like mugging for the camera, funny way that makes it seem a lot more persuasive than it actually is. But once you actually start to dig into it, you'll find there's a lot of really bad economics, really bad like social policy, and really bad reasoning in the video. Yeah, that's what I've got for today. Tomorrow I'm going to aim for having the part 2 of chapter 11 of America's Great Depression up for you guys. We are almost done with that book too, and that's I think I've gotten through all the points that I wanted to make about that one. Yeah, that's all I've got. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're here still, if you enjoyed this, if you want to support the channel, you know what to do. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow with some more Rothbard goodness. Catch you later.